They say you never truly see the world until it punches you in the gut. Until a moment so small, so easily overlooked, cuts through your comfort like glass. That moment for James Whittaker came not in a boardroom, not in the glare of a quarterly report, but in the flicker of movement outside a restaurant window, his restaurant. There, beneath the chandeliers of the ivory room, where senators sipped Bordeaux and billionaires dined on $250 Wagyu, the man behind it all sat alone, savoring. A lavender panna cotta crafted by one of the nation's top chefs. Precision, elegance, control. That was the empire James had built across 47 restaurants nationwide. But what he saw in that alley would dismantle all illusions of control. Forever. It happened in a single blink. A shape in the shadows. Hunched and hurried, moving near the dumpster out back. At first, James thought it was a raccoon or a drunk. But then he saw the white apron, the familiar dark curls. It was Maria Alvarez, 29, polite, dependable, the kind of waitress who blended into fine dining like flatware. She was reaching into the trash. Her hands trembled as she pulled out a discarded steak, half-eaten, smeared with sauce and grime. She looked around like a fugitive, then took a quick bite. Desperate, mechanical. Not for pleasure. For survival. James froze. His spoon clinked against the untouched dessert. Something inside him stalled, then cracked. This wasn't hunger, not the kind you skip a meal for. This was the quiet, gnawing erosion of dignity. A woman he'd walked past 100 times was scavenging in the dark to feed. What? Herself? Her child? He couldn't know yet, but he saw it. The shame that struck her face when she realized she was being watched. She dropped the steak. Her eyes widened, then lowered, and she vanished into the night like a secret she had carried too. He didn't eat the rest of the night, didn't sleep either. His thoughts were a storm of spreadsheets and silence. Pinnacle Dining Group had grown 18% last year. He'd accepted a 7-figure bonus. So how had one of his employees slipped so far through the cracks that trash became dinner? Who else had he not seen? What had his success cost? Maria had worked at the Ivory Room for 3 years. To customers, she was seamless service. But behind the polished smile was a life she kept carefully hidden. A cramped apartment in Pilsen, a sick mother, a 7-year-old daughter named Sophia. Medical bills and rent she barely made with 12-hour shifts. Groceries were luxuries. Rice, beans, and whatever the corner store had on clearance. She never complained, never asked for help. Pride was the only thing she had left to control. Until that night. Until hunger won. And as James stared into that darkness outside the window, he realized this wasn't a one-time tragedy. It was a system. His system. And that night, under crystal chandeliers with no applause, no headlines, no boardroom, a man who had built an empire saw it begin to crumble. Not because of a scandal or a lawsuit, but because of one woman's silent bite from the trash. And the question that followed him home. How many others are starving behind my success? He needed answers. And he would go to the ends of his empire to find them. James Whittaker didn't come into the office the next morning with his usual calm demeanor or clipped instructions. He stormed in like a man possessed, silence trailing behind him like a thundercloud. The pristine, minimalist design of Pinnacle Dining Group's corporate headquarters felt suddenly too clean, too sterile, like it was hiding something. He summoned HR Director Karen Patel and COO Tom Reynolds with a single sharp command. I want a full audit. Karen Patel, always. Composed, adjusted her glasses. On what exactly? She asked, her voice cool. James didn't blink. Everything. Wages, benefits, working conditions, food waste, top to bottom. I want numbers by Thursday. Karen raised an eyebrow. James, our wages are industry standard. We're not breaking any laws. Tom chimed in from across the room. He still carried the gruff tone of a man who'd once run a kitchen line. Labor costs are killing us. You raise wages, we bleed margins. James leaned forward, eyes locked and furious. Then explain why one of our waitresses is eating from a dumpster. The room went silent. Karen looked stunned. Tom opened his mouth, then closed it. No one had an answer. Karen eventually nodded. I'll pull the reports. But James wasn't waiting. That week, the man who once commanded a multi-million-dollar empire from the top floor of a downtown tower vanished from his own kingdom. Gone was the custom-tailored suit. Gone was the entourage. In its place, jeans, a baseball cap, and a carefully rehearsed cover story. Consultant, mystery diner, curious investor. He needed to disappear into his own restaurants to see what they didn't want him to see. Chicago. His first stop was the Ivory Room, his flagship. He dined alone, unnoticed. He watched Maria's replacement smile, move, disappear into the rhythm of service. He chatted with the busboy, an older man named Miguel, who admitted he sometimes took leftover bread home in his pockets. He didn't eat during his shift, just coffee and water. Atlanta. At a location tucked inside a business district, James met Jamal, a server with quick hands and tired eyes. Jamal hadn't eaten all day. Daycare's due this week, he explained. I skip meals so my son doesn't have to. He laughed, but there was no joy in it. Sometimes I hope for a cancellation so I can eat what they prepped. Denver. There, he met Elena, a dishwasher who looked like she hadn't slept in weeks. She hadn't. She slept in her car behind the building, showered at a gas station, changed clothes in the restroom before her shift. Rent's a joke, she said, rinsing a tray of plates. I'd rather sleep in a Honda than give up eating completely. Miami. In the sweltering heat outside a location near the coast, James overheard Priya, a hostess, talk about food banks. She didn't know he was listening. She whispered to a coworker, "Tips were trash last week. I hit up St. Peter's again. They gave me peanut butter and some crackers." Each city, each restaurant, different names, same story. Workers stretched to breaking, lives held together by scraps and silence. What crushed James the most wasn't just the personal stories, it was the waste. The kitchens were immaculate. Chefs prepared every plate like it was art. But behind the scenes, thousands of pounds of edible food, imperfect cuts, untouched garnishes, entire entrees that never left the pass went straight into the trash. He watched one chef throw out 3 untouched fillets. "Wrong sear," the man said flatly. "Can't send that out." James said nothing. He just stared at the waste bin, realizing Maria had probably searched through one just like it. By Thursday, Karen delivered the audit. She entered the boardroom. With a thick binder, her expression unreadable. "You asked for everything, here it is." The report hit the table with a weight that echoed. Out of Pinnacle's 12,000 employees, 68% earned below a living wage for their cities. No paid sick leave, no affordable health care, no food assistance. Turnover was highest among kitchen and floor staff. And then came the final blow, an internal email chain James had never seen. Regional managers had been instructed, explicitly, to suppress wage increases to boost quarterly profit. Lower wages meant higher margins. Higher margins meant executive bonuses, including James's. His heart stopped as he read his own name. With James's support, we'll hold the line, push wages down and maximize shareholder return. His bonus structure is already tied to margin improvement. Let's make it happen. He felt like he'd been punched. The exploitation wasn't a side effect. It was a feature, designed, engineered, by people he trusted, and by him because he never looked. He stood in that boardroom, binder in hand, vision swimming. For the first time, James saw the machine he had built, and the people it crushed beneath it. He didn't call a meeting. He didn't scream. He just walked out. Straight to the Ivory Room. It was after closing. The dining room was quiet. Maria was there, wiping down a table, lost in routine. She didn't notice him at first. He approached, slowly. "Maria," he said softly. She turned. When she saw him, her eyes widened. She dropped the cloth. "I saw you," he said. "In the alley, I'm sorry." Her lips parted, but no words came. Then she looked down. "I didn't want anyone to know," she whispered. "Sophia." She was hungry. "I had to." Her voice cracked, but her back stayed straight. Shame and strength all in one breath, and in that moment James didn't see a waitress. He saw a mother, a fighter, a human being holding together a life with sheer will. This wasn't about policies anymore, it was about people. "Will you talk to me?" he asked. "Privately. I want to fix this, but I need to understand." She hesitated, then nodded. That night, the CEO and the waitress sat across from each other, not as employer and employee, but as two people who saw the world differently until it hurt too much to look away. James didn't know it then, but that conversation would spark something far bigger than a policy change. It would shake the foundation of a corporation. It would stir up enemies, birth allies, and ignite a movement that couldn't be stopped. But for now it began simply, with a mother's quiet confession and a CEO finally choosing to listen. And the cost of not listening? James was about to find out. James Whitaker had never written a policy like this before. Not with lawyers, not with consultants, not with numbers dancing in spreadsheets. This one started in silence, across a diner table from Maria Alvarez, whose hands still bore the calluses of service, whose eyes still carried the quiet ache of survival. She spoke in fragments at first. Not about wages or food waste, but about Sophia's asthma, how much her inhaler cost. About Rosa, her mother, who rationed insulin to keep the lights on. Maria didn't want pity. She wanted dignity. And James, for the first time in his career, listened like his legacy depended on it, because now it did. Out of that conversation came the pinnacle promise. A radical, soul-first blueprint for change. A 20-hour minimum wage, free shift meals for every employee at company, food pantry program for those in need, wellness benefits, mental health support, financial literacy workshops, and perhaps most radical of all, employee representation at the board level. James presented it to his executive team like a man who had crossed a line and didn't plan to go back. "This isn't a favor," he told them. "This is survival, not just for our people, for our company." What he got in return was war. At the next board meeting, the conference room filled with tension sharp enough to cut glass. CFO Richard Holt, 60, gray-haired and granite-faced, slammed the proposal on the table. "This will tank our margins," he barked. "You're handing away shareholder money. For what? Charity?" Beside him, Linda Chen, 47, sleek and surgical in both style and opinion, crossed her arms. "We're a business, James, not a nonprofit. What you're suggesting will spook investors. We're playing with fire." James stood his ground. "We're selling trust," he said calmly, then louder. "If our people are starving while we sip wine in glass towers, we've already lost the market. What are we even selling?" Silence. Karen, Patel, quiet until now, flipped through her notes. "Actually, there's data. Lower turnover could save us millions long term. Productivity, loyalty, brand perception. It all improves with a living wage." Richard glared at her. "That's theoretical." Karen met his gaze. "So is collapse." After 2 hours of back and forth, the board reluctantly approved a 6-month pilot program in Chicago only. No national rollout, no press, just a test, a leash. James agreed, but in his mind, the leash would snap soon enough. As the pilot began, new faces stepped into the story. At the ivory room, Carlos Rivera, 34, worked the line with practiced silence. A single father raising 9-year-old Mateo. He'd seen too many promises come and go. "They'll dangle hope," he told Maria one night, "then yank it back when no one's looking." Maria nodded. "That's why we hold the rope this time." Carlos remained skeptical. But there was something in Maria's eyes that made him pause. Something unbreakable. He joined her employee council quietly, cautiously, a voice of blunt honesty in a room full of cautious whispers. Then there was Lena Brooks, 27, quick-witted, sharp-tongued. A server with ambition, she saw Maria's growing influence, not as hope, but as competition. "You're stirring up trouble," she warned. "This won't end well for you." Maria smiled. "It never started well. So what do I have to lose?" Lena rolled her eyes, but the jealousy ran deeper than she let on. She wanted to climb the ladder. Maria was climbing without one. Meanwhile, in Pilsen, community support began to bloom. Maria's neighbor, Elma, a fierce 40-year-old community organizer with a megaphone voice and a mother's heart, began hosting potlucks, weekly gatherings for fairness. They weren't just meals, they were strategy sessions, a new kind of table. And then came Sophia. 7 years old, asthmatic but bright-eyed, she started Kids for Fairness at her elementary school, chalk murals of workers holding hands, signs that said, "Mommy's my hero," little voices chanting, "People matter," in unison. It wasn't organized, it was instinct, and it spread like wildfire. Hope was growing, but so was resistance. Then came the second crack in the corporate armor, a whistleblower email sent to James directly. Subject line, "Deliberate. Waste. You need to know." It detailed how regional managers were ordered to overpurchase ingredients, ensuring that only perfect items made it onto plates. It was all about aesthetic control, not efficiency. Anything slightly off? Toss. It. Every week, thousands of pounds of edible food discarded while employees skipped meals. One cook in Dallas had been fired for donating leftovers to a shelter. A server in Seattle fainted during a double shift, denied a meal break despite standing for 10 hours. James brought it to the board. Again, resistance. Logistics, risk, optics, but he didn't back down. "We feed strangers 5-star meals," he snapped. "But we can't feed our own?" Still, no green light. And then came the PR war. Elite Eats, a rival chain led by Victor Lang, a slick opportunist with a smile full of veneers, launched an ad blitz. While our competitors let their workers starve, Elite Eats takes care of its own. Choose values, choose Elite. Smoke and mirrors mostly. But the damage was done. Headlines exploded. Pinnacle was under fire. James saw only one move left. Tell the truth. He invited Maria to speak at a press conference. She hesitated. Her hands shook. But Sophia squeezed her fingers and whispered, "You're my hero, Mommy." Maria stepped up to the podium. The cameras flashed. Her voice was soft at first, but unwavering. "I ate from the trash because I had no choice. I was ashamed, but I'm not invisible anymore. Neither are my coworkers. 10 million views. 10 million. It wasn't just a speech. It was a spark. Customers began posting selfies with staff, using the hashtag #ShopPinnaclePromise. Restaurants overflowed, not with foodies, but with allies. A viral movement. Elite Eats' plan backfired spectacularly when their own workers began speaking out. Wage theft, 9-hour shifts, no breaks. Maria was no longer just a server. She was a symbol, a mother, a movement, and James, he was no longer a CEO with regrets. He was a man on a mission, but behind the applause, the shadows hadn't vanished. They were regrouping, watching, and somewhere deep inside the company, a betrayal was brewing. The fight was just beginning. Every movement meets its moment of fracture. For Maria, it came not from her enemies, but from someone she never expected. Lena. The betrayal unfolded quietly. Maria was at the ivory room late one night preparing materials for the next employee council meeting when she received a message from Carlos. "Did you leak the notes?" She blinked, confused. Then another message came, this time with an attachment, a forwarded email sent by Lena Brooks to Richard Halt, CFO of Pinnacle. It included sensitive internal meeting notes, plans for a public rollout of the Pinnacle Promise, and employee testimonies. Raw, unfiltered, vulnerable. Maria's heart sank. The next day, the fallout began. HR quietly summoned staff for compliance check-ins. Several workers pulled away from the council entirely. A dishwasher named Kendra refused to be seen talking to Maria. "I can't lose this job," she whispered before walking away. Maria was heartbroken, not just because of the betrayal, but because the trust she had fought so hard to build was cracking in her hands. Still, she didn't quit. She called Carlos. "We're not stopping," she said. "This isn't about me. This is for Sophia, for Mateo, for all of us." Carlos didn't answer right away. Then finally, Then we keep going. At the same time, James Whitaker was facing a ghost of his own past, his estranged brother, Mark. Mark was a social worker, and unlike James, he had stayed in the city, working with at-risk youth and single mothers, the same demographic James's empire had unknowingly crushed beneath its margins. They met in the hallway of a Chicago community center. Mark didn't bother with pleasantries. "So now you care?" he said. "After you spent your whole career pretending we didn't come from this?" James swallowed. "I didn't know how bad it had gotten." Mark shook his head. "You knew. You just didn't want to look. You ignored Mom working 2 jobs. You buried her struggle in granite countertops and Wagyu beef." The words hit harder than any boardroom argument. Later that week, James returned to their childhood home in Cicero. It was a small bungalow, peeling paint, still standing somehow against time. He stood on the porch, staring at the screen door his mother used to leave open when the summer heat pressed in. He remembered her hands, cracked from cleaning, trembling from exhaustion. He remembered the sound of her sobs in the kitchen, muffled by closed bedroom doors. James broke, and in that emotional collapse something was reborn, not as a CEO but as a son, as a man trying finally to be whole. A few days later, a new bombshell landed. Karen Patel came to his office holding a flash drive. "You need to see this," she said. On it, employee satisfaction surveys from the last 4 years, or rather, what should have been. Entire sections were redacted, scores altered, open comments deleted. James called IT. The original backups, long buried, painted a much darker picture. 82% employee dissatisfaction, with consistent reports of fear, retaliation, and burnout. Regional managers had falsified the data and buried it in a server, knowing the board would never dig that deep. James didn't call a meeting, he called every board member individually. "They lied to us. We failed our people. And if we let this stand, we deserve to lose everything." It all came to a head at the annual shareholders meeting, held at the Grand Ballroom of Chicago's Wellington Hotel. More than 200 investors, analysts, journalists, and employees filled the space. The tension was thick enough to taste. Richard Halt stood at the podium looking every bit the seasoned executive, ready for war. "In light of recent unrest and unpredictable labor costs," he began, "the Pinnacle promise should be scrapped. It's unsustainable. A 25% profit margin growth is possible if we return to sound business fundamentals." He paused. Let the room absorb that number. Heads nodded. Investors scribbled notes. Cameras clicked. Then James took the stage. No notes, no slides, just a man standing on a precipice. He looked out at the crowd, then down, then up again. "I came here today to talk numbers," he began, "but I can't. Not because they don't matter, but because they're not the whole truth." He took a breath. "I saw a woman eat from a dumpster behind my restaurant. Her name is Maria. She's not a liability. She's not a statistic. She's the soul of this company. So are Jamal, who skips meals for his son, Elena, who sleeps in her car, Priya, who depends on food pantries, Carlos, who's raising a child alone. These people, your people, are the only reason Pinnacle exists." His voice cracked. The room stilled. "I was blind. We all were. But we can choose to see, to act." He paused, then turned. Maria stepped onto the stage, dressed simply, holding nothing but her voice. "I was ashamed," she said. "But I'm not anymore. Because silence feeds the problem. We are the ones carrying this brand. And we deserve to eat, to rest, to live." Then Carlos took the mic, still rough around the edges but clear. "You want loyalty? Earn it. Pay us right. Respect us. We've got mouths to feed too." Then, Lena. No one expected her to show. She stepped forward, eyes lowered. "I was wrong," she said. "I betrayed Maria. I thought survival meant stepping on others, but she forgave me. That's what this company can be. Forgiveness. Second chances." A murmur moved through the room. Then, a slow clap. From the back of the ballroom, a retired nurse, gray curls, steady hands, stood. "About damn time," she said. Others followed. Applause rose like thunder. The final vote was called. 38, in favor of keeping the Pinnacle promise. Richard Halt packed his briefcase in silence. His resignation came later that afternoon. Outside the ballroom, the sky had turned gold. Maria hugged Sophia, who had been waiting with Elma and the other kids. Carlos pulled out his phone. 10 million views. He grinned, and counting. But James didn't smile. He just exhaled. Finally. The fight had been won. But the war? That was still coming, and for the first time he was ready for it. 2 years had passed. But the echoes of that moment, the image of a mother scavenging a steak from a trash bin, still shaped everything. Pinnacle Dining Group, once a glittering symbol of exclusivity, had become something else entirely. Something human. With the full implementation of the Pinnacle promise, change took root in places that numbers couldn't always measure. Turnover dropped by 55%. Productivity soared. Customers returned not just for the food, but for the feeling of eating in a place that meant something. And profits? They rose too, 12% in a single fiscal year. The numbers were nice, but the faces told the real story. Maria Alvarez, once invisible in her own uniform, was now a regional supervisor, overseeing operations across 10 locations. Her team called her La Voz, the voice. She led with compassion, clarity, and unshakable belief in the promise she had helped birth. Carlos Rivera, still blunt and straight-talking, now ran monthly food drives, feeding over 5,000 Chicagoans. His son, Mateo, came with him every Saturday. "We used to need help," Carlos told the line one morning, handing out a box of fresh produce. "Now we give it." Lena Brooks, humbled and changed, co-chaired the National Employee Council. Her ambition hadn't vanished, it had evolved. She now fought for scheduling flexibility for working moms and helped implement mental health days across all locations. When someone asked how she went from betrayer to leader, she replied simply, "Maria forgave me, so I learned how to lead." And Sophia, the girl whose hunger once drove her mother to a dumpster, was now a beacon of a generation. At just 9, Sophia won the Chicago Youth Art Contest with her mural titled My Hero, a painting of her mom, arms outstretched, holding a tray above a rising sun. The caption was simple, powerful. "She feeds more than tables, she feeds hearts." Across the country, laws were changing. Inspired by Maria's story, Alma's grassroots coalition pushed for and won a $22 minimum wage law for all restaurant workers in Chicago. Cities like Denver and Miami soon followed. Elma's potlucks became playbooks and Kids for Fairness. It went national with over 100 chapters in schools from coast to coast. As for James Whitaker, he stepped down as CEO, passing the torch to Karen Patel, who had not only backed the data, but had come to believe in the people behind it. James wasn't done, though. He launched Pinnacle Futures, a nonprofit dedicated to mentoring small businesses on ethical labor practices. The first plaque on the wall bore a name, for Mom. He never made a speech about it. But one day, without press or fanfare, James walked back to the Cicero bungalow, now vacant and worn by time. Waiting on the porch was Mark. No words were needed. A nod, a long pause, a hand on the shoulder, and a silence that this time felt like peace. The final scene unfolded in Pilsen Plaza, where a crowd had gathered for the unveiling of a new community mural, painted across 3 brick walls by local artists and children. On it, workers of every color and uniform, hands linked, heads held high. In bold colors, a phrase swept across the sky, "Together we rise." In the crowd stood Maria, Carlos, Lena, Sophia, Alma, and dozens more who had once been unheard. Now, their voices echoed through every brushstroke. The camera zoomed in on Maria's face, no longer weary, no longer afraid. Just proud, whole. The kind of woman who turned shame into legacy. Then the lens tilted up, toward the skyline, toward the sunrise that gilded Chicago in soft gold. A title card appeared. One truth, one voice, one choice, change the world. But as the movement spreads beyond Chicago, new challenges arise. Will Pinnacle survive the national spotlight? Will Maria's voice echo in Washington or be silenced by bigger forces? Stay tuned for part 2. The bill, the battle, the betrayal, and if you believe one voice can change the world, like, comment, subscribe. The revolution is just getting started.